sat with two girls at the assembly, and one of them is a member of Allied Youth, which is an organization which is devoted to helping students realize the inherent difficulties in using alcohol and drugs. And she, of course, like I, would never think of using alcohol or drugs or anything like this. And she was very much concerned with, the plight of some of the students here at Arlington High School. And the other girl who was with us has been using marijuana for just about 3 years now. She's been in my home, and I've watched her physically decay. She's been rather frightening. Right now, she's sort of ill, and the family is taking her off to Florida. In fact, I got teaching her Sunday school class for her this weekend. She's sort of recovering. I think one of the reasons they took her out of school was, sort of help her get back on the road. The questions that we really wanted to ask concern morality. This issue of probe that we are doing is going to be concerned with morality of today's youth and exactly how this is being affected by drugs and various other social and political revolutions, and the attitude of parents, from that perspective. Could you sort of summarize what you feel the basic effect of drugs on the morality of youth has been? Do you feel that it's actually affecting where we stand now?
Well, Judith, do you want me to put the question on the tape will it pick you up this?
Yes, that goes onto the tape.
Yeah, but will it pick up your question?
Yes.
Oh, all right, fine. Will it pick it up like if I left it here? Can you test it? Sometimes you have is there a light that indicates that you're recording and it's all right?
Yeah, this light is on here.
That means it's picking it up.
That means it's picking it up. Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that question that you posed is a very difficult one in terms of, a law enforcement officer to answer, when you preface it with morality. I suppose, let me see if I can answer it in this way. I think that we in law enforcement here, for the past 3 years, have been seeing some very strange things happening as it relates to drugs and youths, young people, as I refer to them. I think that, in my opinion, a great deal of this is due to the type of information that's been available to young people. Mainly, I don't think that we have, when I say we, I'm talking in terms of education and communication between both parents and children, teachers and students, the community and young people, law enforcement and young people. I think it's a wide variety of interaction that should have taken place, social interaction that has not taken place. I think that there has been a sort of a wide gap in trying to understand our young people in terms of their behavior. Why do young people do these things? Why do they take drugs?
I don't know. I think that it's sort of a combination of reasons. I think that maybe originally there were some fellows like Dr. Leary who believed that maybe there's actually something in this. And then it seems like, sort of this non-conforming to conform, and, they sort of, young people go overboard because they think this is the thing to do because, no matter what it is, young people are always willing to follow the crowd. And this is something that really bothers me because this is something I refuse to do. And it really hurts me when I see these other people, doing, just sort of following fellows like this Leary, who obviously I believe has been affected by the use of LSD. because I know people who have seen him, who saw him about 13 or 14 years ago when he was first starting his crusade, and they said that his arguments were lucid and logical, and that he actually made sense, and he appeared quite normal. And now, he's really degenerated.
I would add to that a lot of our there is certainly an amount of allure, daring connected with drugs in terms of some young people. In other words, some young people like to accept the dare, or like to, let's say, live dangerously for a period of time. I don't think we really have to be concerned with these young people, because I think that they gradually straighten out and realize that actually what we're talking about here basically overall is like what Professor Letvin emphasized, judgment. I think the abuse of drugs involves the judgment of an individual eventually. Now,
yes, and well, the one thing with so many of these drugs is that your judgment is affected. You never know when you're going to sort of be turned on or off. Since, like, even marijuana, I believe, has been proved that you can be all right, say, after using it for, say, a half hour or an hour, and then be affected again.
Well, so I think why we are glad to go out and talk to young people, especially students. We could see this thing for 3 years. I mean, this thing that developed in the area of marijuana and the so-called hallucinogens, the mind-expanding drugs, the stimulants. And actually, we looked on with amazement to see that it could take place in our community, in our society, because we felt as though we were so well equipped to deal with problems such as this. And yet, it seems to me that what was sadly lacking when it was beginning was for people to take the attitude, well, this is something that's happening, and I'm sure that, if we ignore it, it will go away. And I'm sure these people were well-meaning and well-intentioned individuals. But as the situation progressed, as to people making real blanket, and I think I'd term them irresponsible statements about marijuana. In terms of whether they consider the thing harmful or non-harmful. On the basis, I think, of a very limited amount of information. I think that as I look at it from law enforcement point of view, and actually that's the only way I can speak. I can't speak from a sociologist's point of view, or a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. I can only speak from the experiences that I've had. It seems to me that we've sort of neglected this area was in trying to get across to young students and young people that an individual who commits himself to smoking marijuana constantly, that I would say eventually has got to end up as a beatnik or a hippie or whatever you want to call them, because basically these are the people we deal with. These are the people that we see coming in here all the time.
Well, I saw the picture from your little adventure last night.
Yeah. Well, that was sort of a different operation, which didn't include too many hippies or
really?
Beatniks. Yeah,
well,
because
the picture I saw looked rather...
This was another strange turn of events as far as drugs are concerned, because this investigation last night concerned mainly cocaine, which is unusual in the terms of
as you said in the lecture, you don't find it very often.
Well, after I got through that lecture, I think I wasn't back here 2 hours, and I had one of my investigators tell me that there's more cocaine coming into the city than we ever saw before, and it's coming in by way of Cuba.
Oh my.
So, the drug problem really, I don't know whether I said this in my lecture or not, but 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, it was a little complex problem. Complex to the people that are involved, namely the police and the addicts. And it was a minute problem. We knew how big it was. We knew the people who were involved in it. But today,
That's the impression I was always under. I remember when I was in the 6th grade, there was a series of articles in the Saturday Evening Post. Maybe you saw them. I think they ran from September through November. And I remember reading every one of them, and we talked about them in my class at school. And to us, we had our own little minds. In our minds, formed a picture of the addict as somebody in the slums, involved with some sort of a gang.
usually was a pretty good picture of drugs.
And now, when you see your own friends, being called down to the office and all these things happening, and,
Yes.
it's really frightening.
Yeah, would you please? Well, I think, leave the door open too, Bob, but it's kind of hot in here. I think this is the thing that I'm trying to emphasize, that the change, in the pattern of the drugs and the drug dependent people, in terms of environment areas where it's centered before, say, 5 years ago, as compared to areas that it's centered today. And I think that as we look back upon it, we look back in amazement and wonder how it all could happen like this.
Do you think that the problem is a lasting problem that is going to sort of continue increasing, or that it'll sort of fade out as it has come into being?
No, really, I feel very encouraged in the last couple of months. I think that, what you saw in Arlington High was an example that I'm talking about in terms of education getting involved. Now, I know that if for instance, like when I go to Arlington High and talk about drugs, that doesn't give the student a well-balanced picture of drugs in general. This is law enforcement's point of view. I think that what I mean by education, I mean a fairly substantial amount of information and knowledge from several different viewpoints. And I think that a child or a student that gets this kind of knowledge that will be important to him or her to understand what kind of a substance they're fooling with. I think that why I look back in retrospect and say, I think a lot of our young people gravitated towards this with a limited amount of information. And I think that in the city of Boston, the school department has developed a curriculum geared right from the 1st grade right up to the 12th grade. We see it all around. We see indications that the other side of the coin is now being presented. If you read the Boston Globe last Sunday, you've seen a 2-page spread of what I'm trying to say. I think that if we get this kind of communication, if this type of communication could have been put before the public, say 2 or 3 years ago,
Yes.
I think that the child or the young person would have had a better balance, a better perspective as to make a judgment as to whether or not one should get involved or not. I don't say this will eliminate the problem,
But certainly will help the students to somehow rationalize the issue and figure out exactly all of the ramifications of using drugs. That's why I'm so happy that your lecture was presented at the junior high school level. I have a brother who's in the 7th grade, and he came home to report, oh boy, what a great lecture. We spent 3 of my classes just discussing it.
Well, that's good. This is what we need. I think,
So-
I go to groups where I speak to a lot of people who do use drugs, who do use marijuana. And I feel that when you're effective in terms of the communication you develop afterwards, with the group that you're talking to, especially if you're talking with a group that do use drugs. I think that, if they see a policeman or a police officer in his true light, I don't think that we should be considered as monsters or somebody who is waiting to knock your door down and come in and make an arrest. I think we look at the problem, especially what's happening in the drug area, as sort of a challenge to everybody, to the police, because I think good enforcement is necessary with minimizing our drug problem. But I also would emphasize that is what's more important is good education. I think that the primary function of any police department is to try to prevent a problem from developing, rather than wait for a problem to develop and then try to do something about it. But I feel, and sincerely I feel this, that I don't think that the police department or the law enforcement agencies were the cause of this problem. I think that we were probably the first ones to become aware of what was going on in our community in terms of our middle class part of our society getting involved in the use of drugs. And we were discussing it among other law enforcement agencies. You know, how come this thing is happening? How come our heroin problem is going out into our residential areas? How come we can't make any impression or any kind of effective communications to these, even when we bring them in here, you know, when they're under arrest, we talk to them there. To be frank, they're quite open and honest about their environment. That's why I think that, you know, when we gain perspective from their side and they tell us, you know, how these other types of drugs affect them, LSD affects them, how speed affects them, and indicating that they're sort of proud to be a part of this environment, you know. And yet, basically, when we look and we talk about drugs, and I would say the same for alcohol as it relates to the alcoholic. After all, those people, either an alcoholic or a drug addict, indicate that they're not happy with our environment, that they want to withdraw, that they just, there may be so much pressure, so much tension, so much anxiety built up within them, that they just seem to gravitate towards drugs or alcohol as a means of escaping from it, as a means of not coping with their environment. Gee, I'm 44, and you know, I've got the same type of tensions that they had when they were young. I'm sure a great many people do. I think that there's enough. I think that every one of us need a little tension, a little anxiety, probably to make life worthwhile. And so I'm trying to understand how these young people, and I'm thinking in terms of the pot smoker now, because he presents the most complex problem to the police. You know, the individual who has no criminal background. His first arrest is usually for marijuana. And you know, a policeman doesn't take it very lightly to give an individual his first arrest.
I know, that must be sort of a moral issue also.
In terms of background, good family, maybe a college college student and things like that. And then when it does involve a college student, a great many of our men here have youngsters going to college, you know, and you know that you're creating a situation for that individual. But on the other hand, we can look from a mature point of view and say, from what we've seen of the problem, even though it involves maybe a student getting expelled from a school or college, and going to court and being charged with this violation of narcotic drug law, that it hasn't crippled the individual. In other words, chances are, and most of our cases are possession cases, you know. In other words, if we're talking about a sale of drugs, we're talking about an altogether different problem, and the courts treat it a little differently. If we're talking about possession, we're talking about, let's take a college student who was found at the college area, in the dormitory, smoking pot or other drugs. He's expelled from college usually, but a lot of the colleges will do this. They'll give the boy or girl a medical discharge. In other words, this won't disqualify him for applying for another college. Some colleges will suspend you for a semester.
We know a girl to whom that happened. Very brilliant girl. She was an honor student last year at Arlington High. And I shouldn't say this, but she was president of the debating club, of which I'm president this year. And our advisor just found out the other day, our entire debating club is currently sort of in shock, you know, about her plight. She was supposed to go up to the University of Massachusetts, and somebody met her in Boston, working in Jordan Marsh. So.
Well, that's just one part of it. The court action follows, usually involves the individual getting placed on probation for a certain period of time. And then at the end of that time, if he or she behaves himself or herself, the court will then take the case and usually dismiss it. Well, this is as though as they've never been before the courts. So we look at it in terms of, what this drug or what this marijuana has created for this young college student. It's created that, number one, he's going to be expelled or suspended from college. Number two, he's going to go to court and get a term of probation. But the overall picture indicates that he's going to come out all right in terms of social acceptance. This record that he's created for himself, he's not going to be able to be with him or her for any length of time, because our system of justice indicates that, unless you're convicted of a crime, you would not suffer any social stigma. Yeah. Did you get it?
No, I called back yet. This is on a federal search warrant last night.
Yeah.
Would they be before the U.S. Commissioner?
No.
This is a separate case.
This is a state case, only a federal search warrant.
But they're going to court on that.
Right. So, basically, I think that the only thing that we in law enforcement can hope to obtain is that every young person be made aware of some of the pitfalls of our community in terms of drugs. And I would say that, again, I would reiterate the fact that we're talking about drugs. We're talking about very dangerous substances, and that the abuse of these substances is going to create a problem for the individual.
One sort of final question. Do you feel it is the influence of the home partially that is responsible for the use of drugs? I know that as the father of several children, you must have some opinion on that.
Yes, I think that when you say the influence of the home, I have got 5 children, and some of them, my oldest girl is 17. And I find as a parent that sometimes it's very hard to communicate to your children, especially when they get into an age bracket where it seems as though they're finding themselves. They want to be independent and so forth. I think this is why I'm sort of anxious about this problem, and I think everybody in this particular part of our department is involved, because we see in the people we're bringing in, with the exception, now let's not say the hippie in terms of, we don't want to see our children ever become hippies, but in terms of, say, the college student that gets involved in this situation, we're thinking in terms of our own children. What could we do differently that would eliminate this child from getting involved in this problem? And I feel that no matter how efficient you may be as a parent, that my children are going to accept a lot of what their peers and what their associates want to do. And if it's drinking alcohol, if that's the thing that their associates do, chances are my children are going to do it. I don't know how we can prevent this unless, here again, I think that we should inform our children, what the reaction of alcohol is in the body.
But then that they see the parent doing it.
Yeah, I agree. But on the other hand, suppose you figure you're an ideal parent, that you haven't got any bad faults like drinking too much or taking pills or things like that, so you don't create this atmosphere in the home. And then what if your child does get involved with drugs? How do you explain it to yourself? I think a lot of parents, parents that come in here, they say, where do I fit? What I do wrong? I work 6 days a week. Well, maybe he works too much. Maybe I work too much. You know, maybe I devote too much time to this job. You know, I could give you a beautiful example. Yesterday we had a 13-year-old girl in here from very pathetic circumstances. You know, let's say a tough environment where the mother and father were present in the home, but evidently the father drank liquor too much, and the mother was in here. And the mother was in here to get her 13-year-old girl, take her home. She had been away from home 2 days and in a sort of a rough section of our city. Now, the mother was saying to the girl, if you don't tell the police where you stayed for 2 days, I'm going to cut you with a knife.
Now, that's really going to help, I'm sure.
Now, what happened then, when I seen the attitude of the mother towards her 13-year-old daughter, then now I knew I couldn't let this girl go home. Because I felt the mother kept saying this to the girl and then saying she was going to cut off all her hair. And then when the father come home, he was going to beat her up something unmercifully. Now, how could I, as a policeman and as a parent, allow that girl to go home? So I did the next best thing that I could. I called the youth service board and I arranged to send her out there and telling them, matron or the probation officer out there, that this kid really needs to be looked into as far as their home life is concerned. Yeah. Now, you and I could probably understand. Yeah. You excuse me? Hello? Yes, sir. Hi, Ken. 10 o'clock. He wants us at 10:15, so. Right. Did you forgive us for last night? Yeah. Yeah. I know, Kenny. You know this is a follow-up situation anyway.
Bobby Griffin. Bobby Griffin? Yeah, it was just here. Bobby!
Hey, Kenny, listen, these guys over the press room knew it's 5 o'clock. Well, don't the guys in the Globe here? Is that right? Well, whose fault is that? Right. Hey, Kenny, do these people realize, you know, all right, we got 28 last night, right? But, you know, we could have ended up with 2. Do you know that? Right. I mean, you know, don't you feel like a real donkey if you call the press and everything, and then you go, well, hey, look at Kenny, between you and I could care less for the press, you know, because I don't think that this helps us at all, you know. And listen, Kenny, you know, up to me, I called no reporters last night, not one. How they all arrive, I got a pretty good idea how they arrived here, but, right. Hey, Kenny, what do you want me to do? Throw out about 15 guys by that time? Hey, Kenny, you know, I thought really that everybody in the news meter was upstairs anyway, because everybody had a camera on, and I just figured there was nobody left out. Yeah. Kenny, I'm taping a show here for a young lady at the... Okay, Kenny. Right. Bye-bye. Sorry, Judy, but those are the... what were we talking about?
Well, you were talking about permissiveness in the home.
Yeah.
And you sort of got onto that young girl, 13-year-old.
Yeah, well, no, see, here was an example of, I think, an unreasonable parent, you know. You could easily look at this situation and, as an unexpertise as I am, realize that this young lady's problem began with her parents, you know. But I show you that to indicate, you know, that the feeling in law enforcement isn't just to ignore these basic social ills, but to try to do something constructive. Now, a lot of people would argue, well, what's sending an individual youth service board? I mean, maybe she'll get a psychiatric evaluation, and maybe you can talk some sense into the parents. I hope so. But on the other hand, what was the alternative we had? You know,
do nothing and to sort of ruin yourselves in the
to send the kid home and think maybe this woman might have been a little bit off, so that she might have hurt that kid. You know, like scarring her face. She was a very pretty girl. You know, and the mother, it indicated to the mother, if I destroy this kid's beauty, you know, perhaps she'll stay at home and perhaps she won't run away from home. So do you see the reasoning of the mother? Unfortunately, it's a tough situation, but realize we can't be, you know, we've got to adapt to what we have. You know, we like to dream and say, you know, if we could wave a magic wand over a person's head and say, you know, this person will be all right, or this person won't use drugs anymore. I say that it's our responsibility as adults and as members of a community and a society to make our information that we have available to young people, and I'm sure it's going to be done in the next year or so. I'm sure that we're going to see a different attitude prevailing. You know, like, after all, are we looking, and is science looking for some kind of a pill or chemical that we can take and that we are going to be able to eliminate all our tensions and anxiety? Is this the type of society that we're looking for? Is this the type of research
I hope not. Brave New World, you know, by Aldous Huxley had that sort of, you know.
And yet, I think that, you know, a lot of these young people, this is the type of solution they're seeking. It's very hard. I think that there's been, you know, you've heard much about the communications gap, and it seems as though when we can't explain a situation, we say, you know, it's lack of communication. But I think everybody has fallen down, and I admit it. I think that, as I say, law enforcement became a community, whereas a lot of people tended to say, well, even if it's true, it's only a fad and it's going to go away after a period of time. See? Hello? Hi, Paul. Yeah. Hey, let me call you back, right? So, I think that what we really strive for now is a good educational program, well balanced, not something, you teach children about this week and then forget about for another year.
That's what I'm afraid is going to happen in Arlington, you see. The school committee has a knack for doing this sort of thing, getting all excited about a program and keep it going for maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years and then forgetting it. And I just have a feeling that this is what's going to happen.
Well, Judy, let me say this. I think it can happen very easily, and it may be something that will happen because of the I think this should be adopted into a curriculum, really. But I think that, I hope, in the next year or 2 years, we're going to see a very sharp decline in the use of drugs, among young people. And I include marijuana in that, because actually, what does the hippie offer a young person, except to be different? Sure, you sure are different.
I'll say.
But in terms of motivation, what is it?
Not much.
Sometimes, like when we see some of these young girls come in who are streetwalkers and find that they're very young, sometimes as young as 13, and and then try to understand how they became or how they got into this situation. And a lot of people say, well, they're showing hostility at their parents, and this is the type of hostility they show, doing something that's really sort of wicked, and this is what psychologists would say anyway. So I agree in a great many cases, but in a lot of cases I don't. I just show you this because there probably is, our young people want to be more realistic than maybe some of the adults have been, in terms of double standards, a lot of things are going on in our world today. We have a certain rule for this one and a certain rule for that one. Maybe the young people don't like that. Maybe they say, hey, look, let's have one rule for everybody. And yet, as we look back at our civilization, who is it?
Sounded like a male voice.
Hello? Yes, sir. Hi. Good, Good. We got him here. Yeah. Okay.
Did you pick up this thing here? Not one of your...
Yes, that's a psychedelic drawing that came off of one of the walls in some of the ads.
That's something, really.
You see, not being very creative myself, it doesn't do anything for me. I wouldn't mind if some people would say, that that's a very enlightening, whatever it is, I would feel better, if some person, I haven't yet met a person who would come in here and say, oh, what a wonderful picture that is, whatever it's supposed to be. I think that, some creative person may be able to, look at that and see something in it that I can't. But as I say, I'm very ignorant of drawings and paintings, and I can go to the museum and get the same reaction from a lot of pictures that people really enjoy,
Well, I don't know. I've grown up in a home where art has always played a very important part, and my mother is very fond of modern art. We do have a living room filled with several paintings, some of which my brother did in nursery school, and I've grown to appreciate those. But they are, along sort of a central theme, but this is also positively, I don't know, it seems to be all little things.
Maybe it describes their thinking. Actually, Judy, let me say this so I won't forget it. Sometimes, we see, even now, even as bad as our problem is now, that there's a maturing out process going on here in the marijuana area. In terms of, we're not getting too many individuals over 25. So,
whereas originally, wasn't the average addict from the ages of about 23 or something to 38 or
21 to 30.
28 or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, that would be more or less what we know about heroin. But when we're talking about marijuana, we're thinking in terms of individuals under 25. Basically, and mainly, we had a couple of hippies here, 30, 34, but mainly they're under 25. And it was funny, we had 7 individuals in here the other day. And I'm sorry, these kids were all 17, And one of them was a daughter of a policeman in the suburbs.
Oh, that's not good.
And 2 of the individuals came from Connecticut, both in high school. And, they were living in one of our pretty expensive apartment buildings. And they have, it was the first time in, let's say, 3 years that this problem began, with, let's say, 1 or 2 exceptions that I might have forgotten about, that we've got a repeater, In other words, in terms of possession now, not sales. In sales, we've got repeaters over and over again. But in terms of possession, that would be like the hippie in possession of it. These 2 kids from Connecticut, 17-year-old boys, had been arrested in Connecticut for it. And as I say, these were the first 2 that I can recall, and I may be wrong, maybe 1 or 2 others, that say out of a total of, say, 300 to 400 cases that we've examined in the past 2 years, that we got a repeaters on possession. Now, this is another indication, that perhaps good enforcement wakes some of these people up, and say, oh, I'm not going to get mixed up with that foolish thing again. I got arrested, I got expelled from college, or my parents know about it, and, parents have a more apt to generalize drugs in one area. In other words, when they mention the word drugs, they have a tendency to say, oh, he's shooting heroin, Well, it might be a stimulant, it might be an amphetamine. And a parent gets all upset about it. My son or my daughter's a drug addict, and they're thinking in terms of heroin.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not.
All part of the stereotype picture from
Right, of drugs, in general. So that, I say these 2 indications, not over 25, and we're not running into too many repeaters on possession cases. Now, having in mind, I'm talking mainly about this, probably an individual I'm trying to stereotype in terms of, like last night, the raids that were conducted last night, we get a lot of marijuana, But these would not be the people that I'm talking about, because this was the, let's say, the low social economic group that we were seeking out last night. Mostly would be more on the heroin side than they would be classified as marijuana users, but almost everybody had marijuana. Along with cocaine, which, as I said, we hadn't seen so much cocaine in here, in this city, since the history of the police department. So here again, we get our drug picture changing. Now, cocaine you sniff, you put on your arm and you sniff much like snuff was sniffed years ago. And, you wonder how can they sell this to people? How do you become, say you're a pot smoker. How do you say, well, no, all right, now you're a pot smoker. I got some coke, and individual, would the pot smoker go for coke? We haven't got any facts or any statistics to indicate whether they would or they wouldn't. I would
Is cocaine addictive?
Not in the sense that it would be like heroin, Not in the sense. You can become habituated to any drug, In other words, because you take, I'm habituated to smoking, because I've smoked so much, and I'm kicking it now. Here's how I'm kicking it. I'm going from cigarettes to a pipe, In other words, I'm going through the slow withdrawal process. Now, cocaine wouldn't be addicting in the sense physical, but you could develop if you use something over a period of time, you're going to develop some kind of dependence on it,
Yes. Well, I tell you, I really have to be getting home now since I got
Okay,
a
Judy.
good hour and a half trip back to my town.
Good.
So I'll not